Hello students, today we are going to discuss Hindu nationalism, a historical analysis. This unit would enable the students to understand Hindu nationalism, factors responsible for the rise of Hindutva, construction of an alternative history, and the origin myth of Hindutva. Hindu nationalism emerged in India at a time when the movement to free India from the Britishers was gaining momentum. Gandhi, who led the freedom movement, recognized the need for an all-inclusive program to take on the mites of the Britishers. It had leaders representing diverse ethnicities, faiths and ideologies under the banner of Indian nationalism. Their values mainly revolved around Indian nationalism based on the founding principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. A variety of organizations were subsequently formed to represent the industrials, businessmen, workers, educated class in the freedom movement. These organizations in turn formed the Indian National Congress in 1885 as they recognized the need for a strong, all-inclusive political organization to fight the colonial power. At the same time, the United India Patriotic Association was also formed in 1888 by the feudal elites who feared the decline in their social status and power with the decline of the colonial rule. However, this alliance did not last long, and it split, resulting in the formation of the Muslim League by the Muslim elites in 1906. While the Hindu elites first formed the Punjab Hindu Sabha in 1909 and later Hindu Mahasabha in 1915. The Hindu Mahasabha, in the form of Hindu nationalism, and the RSS, the National Volunteers Organization, which became the ideological fountainhead of Hindutva, gradually started asserting themselves. Nationalism suggests that a majority community gains the upper hand in setting the nationalist and patriotic agenda while expecting obedience from the minority groups. In India, Hindu nationalism, also known as Hindutva, seeks to establish a Hindu Rashtra that visualizes a Hindu self and the minorities like the Muslims and the Christians as the other. Hindutva as an ideology proliferated by the Hindu conservative elements that aspires to establish India as a Hindu state by using the Hindus who were divided along the lines of caste, class, language and other diversities and differences. Hindu nationalism or Hindutva finds its origin in the major religion in India, Hinduism. It is a mixture of ethno-nationalism, religious fundamentalism and fascism. Hindutva seeks to establish India as a Hindu nation and perpetuate its idea of a homogeneous national unity and identity in a pluralistic and largely assorted society. It promotes an Indian identity of Hindu pride, monopolizes the chronicles on patriotism and loyalty to the nation, and establishes Hindu fundamentalism and bigotry in India. It manufactures the notion of the self and the other through a complex and creative definition of who belongs or does not belong to the Indian nation. Deepa Reddy defines Hinduism in her article Hindutva Formative Assertion. It is organically linked to Hinduism, though the nature of its relationship to religion and religious practices remains indefinite. Its politics are strategic, calculating, instrumentalist, troubling, polarizing, and seems routinely to participate in intense debate, at best rioting and violence at worst. Its modalities of operation, its reliance on state capabilities and particularly its use of theories of primordiality, like it variously to ethno-nationalism, religious fundamentalism, and fascism. Christopher Jeffrelot argues that Hindu nationalism as a phenomenon with its amalgamation of religion, culture, language, and a sacred territory appears to be the result of a perfect recipe for ethnic nationalism. The motto Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan is also echoed in many other European nationalisms based on religious identity, common language, or even racial feeling. The Hindutva scheme of creating a homogeneous India is spearheaded by an umbrella organization called the Sangh Parivar that provides institutional infrastructure to represent every aspect of socio-political life in India. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh (RSS), literally the National Volunteer Organization or Corps, founded in 1925, is considered the ideological source of Sangh Parivar. It upholds the Hindutva ideology that demands to endorse the Hindu way of life and its cultural symbols in India to establish Hindu hegemony. RSS is also BJP's muscle and provides the cadres and foot soldiers that are indispensable at times of election. The core aim of Hindutva is Hindu religion's revival and reform movements. These include overwhelming fear of religious conversion that is exemplified in attempts to reconvert people to Hinduism, in Ghar Vapsi or Come Home campaigns, and to oppose conversion out of Hinduism. Hindutva also involves the policing of endogamy with regards to both interreligious marriages and the revival of intercaste restrictions, as well as the campaign against cow slaughter. It has also stirred up conspiracy theory like love jihad, whereby accusing Muslim men of feigning love with Hindu women for conversion to Islam. Now we come to the historical analysis of factors responsible for the rise of Hindutva. Three major variables responsible for Hindu nationalism's rise and success. First, British historiography that India made the Hindu-Muslim animosity the centerpiece of historical analysis in order to justify British rule, coupled with a deliberate policy of divide and rule that widened the chasm between the two communities. Second, the writings of Savarkar and other ideologues such as Gwalkar that presented this dichotomy starkly and painted the Indian Muslims as the quintessential other, thus arguing that Hindus alone were the real owners of the land and Muslims were intruders. Third, and possibly the most important, the partition of the country in 1947 that hived away the Muslim majority area from India, thus rendering Indian Muslims demographically and politically marginal, if not irrelevant in independent India, thus paving the way for eventual capture of power by Hindu nationalists. The British policy of divide and rule. Let's take a look at how this policy kind of influenced the gap, the rise in the gap between the Hindus and the Muslims. The British colonial government played an important role in promoting sectarian consciousness and communalism in order to consolidate their rule in the Indian subcontinent, especially after the 1857 mutiny. In this pursuit, they came across this unique opportunity of playing one against another, which has been classically described as divide and rule policy. Then the colonial government began dealing with the two communities, that is the Hindus and the Muslims, separately. According to Z.K. Hassan, The introduction of separate electorates was one such favors. It was also seen as the counterpoise to the growing strength of anti-colonial movement. The principle of communal representation inevitably led to the creation of political camps organized against each other and teaches men to think as partisans and not citizens. The Bengal partition further divided the Indian society. The British contended that Bengal is too large a province to be considered as a single unit. Therefore, they divided Bengal, giving politically less active Hindu areas of Bihar to intellectual Hindu political leaders of Calcutta, and a new Muslim majority of East Bengal and Assam was created with Dhaka as its capital. This led to the rise of a malicious form of nationalism among the Bengali intellectuals of Calcutta. The rise of ideologues like Savarkar. Amidst the political unrest of Bengal partition, the first leaders of Indian independence movement surfaced. Bal Gangadhar Tilak. He also came to be the first right populist leader in India. Tilak, along with Lala Lajpat Rai and Bipin Chandra Pal, were Hindu nationalists that transformed the political discourse of Indian independence movement. They were known as extremist Hindu leaders and were considered as populist because of their fight for the Hindu population against the British Raj. Another Hindu leader, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, was highly inspired by Tilak and his ideas of Hindu nationalism under the essence of Swaraj. Acceptance of British slavery was daunting for Savarkar. Frustrated with progressing British hold and infiltration by Firangi, Savarkar vowed to free his Dharti Mata, motherland, of its infiltrators. In 1923, being part of Hindu Mahasabha, he propagated the term Hindutva, which grabbed the essence of Hinduness, giving Hindu nationalism firm ground to embellish. Hindutva developed into a dynamic and spirited ideology for radical rights of Indian independence movement. It became a religious identity encouraging Indian culture, exhibiting pure Hindu values for sole purpose of uniting Hindus as a nation. To Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, the term Hindutva meant quality of being a Hindu. Hindus, according to Savarkar, are those who considered India as a land in which their ancestors lived. In his work Essentials of Hindutva, Savarkar provided three distinct criteria for identifying Hinduness: common nation, common race, and common civilization, which became the basis for exclusion of both the Indian Muslims and Indian Christians. Savarkar minimized the importance of religious criteria in the definition of Hindu by claiming that Hinduism was only one of the attributes of Hinduness. Hindu, Hindustan, and Hindutva meant the whole civilization and history. Hindutva does not mean the term but the history itself. Hindutva is not a word but a history, not only the spiritual or religious history of our people, as at times it is mistaken to be by being confounded with the other cognate term Hinduism. Hinduism is only a derivative, a fraction, a part of Hindutva. Hindutva embraces all the departments of thought and activity of the whole being of our Hindu race. Savarkar's Hindutva ideology was gaining popularity and reached Keshav Baliram Hegrawar. Being a disciple of Tilak and inspired by Hindutva of Savarkar, Hegrawar in 1925 formed the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS. Populist calls to Hindus were made under the conception of Akhand Bharat, where Christians, Muslims, and British were considered as aliens to Hindu nation, rooted in Hindu motherland. M.S. Golwalkar, a founding member of RSS and a prominent ideologue of Hindutva, goes a step ahead and declares Muslims as the enemies of the nation. In his Branch of Thoughts, 1966, Golwalkar dedicated a chapter titled Internal Threats to highlight the three pertinent threats to Indian society: Muslims, Christians, and communists. It has been a tragic lesson of the history of many a country in the world. Golwalkar laments that the hostile elements within the country pose a far greater menace to national security than aggressors from outside. Now we come to the point of misrepresentation of Indian history. Now, apart from the heinous project of pitting communities with each other, the English presented a distorted version of Indian history and came up with a communal division of the historical period. Ancient was declared Hindu, India, ignoring the Buddhist, Jains, and several other sects and their contribution to the period. Medieval was declared Muslim, India, ignoring the role of Bhakti and Sufi mystics, and the power struggle between Afghans and Turks. Ironically, the modern period was not dubbed as Christian period, although all the European powers were followers of different versions of Christianity. Let it be the Portuguese, Dutch, French, or the Britishers. Maulana Muhammad Ali, a prominent leader of the national movement, said, "If there is one other sin which I charge the Great Britain with, in addition to the charge of emasculating India, it is the making of wrong histories about India and teaching them to us in our schools. History teaching and theories of division were meticulously developed and passed on to the people so that they become aware of our heroes, and stories related to their valor were circulated through textbooks." James Mill's division of Indian history into three phases, ancient, medieval, and modern, became a framework for communalists, from which they could construct their past and their present identities. The idea of the glorious past, led by the Hindu rulers, and the separateness of the communities emanates from such constructions. Further, such ideas gathered strength from reviving and amplifying memories, real and imaginary, of all the wrongs the Muslim invaders has done in India, humiliating Hindu rulers on battlefields, destroying Hindu temples, imposing of certain taxes, and treating non-Muslims as lower than second-class citizens. Hindu and Sikh warriors like Prithviraj Chauhan, Guru Gobind Singh, and Shivaji, who resisted the Muslim rulers, were portrayed as national heroes. The power struggle was presented as war between two religions, consciously ignoring the period of assimilation and syncretism, highlighting strife, discord, and animosity, even though it was purely political in nature. The Hindu nationalists at first have restrained their ideologues as heroes on the basis of distorted understanding of history, and then they asserted the Hindutva ideas as alternate facts, and finally they are on their path to establish a Hindu nation. The idealization project of the Hindutva ideologues began with reinstating of Savarkar as a freedom fighter and a revolutionary. In 2006, on the occasion of Savarkar Jayanti, late Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee would go on to declare Savarkar meant tattva, which is element, tark, arguments, and tarunya, youth, tej, brilliance, tyag, sacrifice, and tap, penance. BJP on several occasions has declared its intentions of awarding Bharat Ratna to Savarkar. All this became a part of the construction of an alternative history by the ruling elites. After the BJP-led NDA government came to power in 2014, the recreation of alternative facts began in two forms: reasserting religion and reclaiming science. The reassertion of religious projects began with the love jihad, lynching in the name of cow, renaming cities, and Ram at Ayodhya. Several BJP leaders have been making provocative statements ever since. These statements are often made by insignificant members of the organization, as it would be easier to dismiss them but enable a public spectacle. The BJP's restorations of alternative facts is a deliberate attempt to reclaim science, has been in the form of narratives derived from mythologies and epics. For instance, one of the BJP MP would go on to state cow dung and the urine can cure cancer. Another added, cows exhale oxygen. Another member of the parliament declared Darwin's theory as scientifically wrong. In his defense, the member stated, nobody, including our ancestors, in written or oral history said that they ever saw an ape turning into a human being. These narratives in the form of speeches, declarations are intended to recreate alternative histories and reclaim science. Through these descriptions, an individual is created and reproduced as a subject of Hindutva ideology, often referred to as an interpellation. Now we come to the origin myth of Hindutva. In order to fulfill the criteria of ethnic nationalism that merges race, religion, and caste, Hindutva had to strengthen a claim to Hinduism's origin as entirely indigenous and original. For religious fundamentalist movements, it is important to be grounded on a sound theory of origin, as it plays a central role in constructing a worldview of the unerring nature of the religion and the literal truth of its text or its fundamentals. The Hindutva myth of origin is based on the idea of the Aryans as the foundational race of modern Hindutva ideology, and the Vedic age, that is the Rig Veda, the earliest Aryans or Aryan text, as ushering in the utopia that modern Hinduism must recover in order to establish a Hindu state. Historical research that points to early Indian people and civilization as being composed of a number of migrants from Africa, and that the group known as Aryans came much later from Central Asia, is now deeply controversial and indeed considered heretical. Historian Ramila Thapar points to the ways in which historical questions regarding Aryan identities are now enmeshed in a variety of cultural politics. According to Thapar, today there is a concerted effort to deny escalating archaeological, linguistic, and genetic evidence about early Indians. This indication amounts to the scholarly consensus which has overturned an earlier hypothesis of the colonial era that Aryans invaded India, a proposition that was accepted by Savarkar. The invasion theory now has been replaced by a gradual migration theory which demonstrates that Aryans, who are a linguistic and not a racial group, gradually arrived in India after the flowering of the large urban civilization known as the Indus Valley civilization, referred to by the Hindutva groups as the Saraswati civilization. The increasing focus on ingenuity and race theory has meant that the official Hindutva view now claims that Aryans were the original Indians, indeed the original Hindus. With this, we come to the conclusion of our discussion. In present day India, the concept of us versus them has been used by the Hindu nationalist to vilify the others. The moment one adversary in the other is eliminated, the Hindutva self would create and target another. The other is sustained itself. Hindu nationalists have been demonizing Muslims as terrorists and asserting their goal of India as a nation for Hindus. Hindutva has tried to create a new nationalism for India. It is pretty similar in its emphasis and content to the monumental unitary conception of Indian nationalism that has tried to serve as the official ideology of the post-colonial Indian state, but it reduces Indian nationalism to a brute Hindu majoritarianism. This explains why Hindu nationalism as a political creed has assumed salience and potency in contemporary Indian state. With this, we come to the end of our discussion. Thank you.